very nice to have you here, and I'm really happy you could participate for the documentary.
You're very welcome, Aaron. It's my pleasure.
So, first question is, how were you introduced to Aikido?
Oh wow, that is a strange question because there's a strange and long story behind it. Many years ago, in 1992, I was dating my future wife at that time, and we happened to be in a place called Sedona in Arizona. And there was a man who was sitting outside a bookstore, and his name was Ron Elgus, I still remember it. And Ron claims that he can read your auras. He says all of us have these lights around us, and he claims to read them. And actually he says that he's not really interpreting them. He's got these little people who talk in his ear. So he just repeats what these little people say. So I had a reading for about 45 minutes, and at the end of which he asked me, do you have any questions for the little people? And my answer was yes, I do have a question. And my question was, how do I further myself along my spiritual path? And so the little people said Aikido. And I had no clue what that was about. And so I said, Aikido? What is Aikido? And he waited for a little bit. And he said, the little people are saying that you will find out. So as soon as the trip was over and I came back to Atlanta, I went to the Aikido Center. And I talked to Candy Sensei, and I observed the first day, and I was totally amazed and blown away by it, and been there ever since. In about a month, it'll be 20 years that I've been doing Aikido.
How was I introduced to Aikido? I started practicing when I was in graduate school. I was walking across campus one day, and I had been thinking about getting involved in some sort of activity, just physical activity. And I'd used up all the physical education courses that the university offered that I was interested in. I saw a poster for the Aikido Club and decided to give it a try. And about 6 months later, I was still practicing. I went into class one day and realized I was having as much fun when I was taking falls as I was when I was throwing people, and decided I was hooked.
Well, I had practiced a little bit of judo when I was a kid, but I wasn't very competitive and didn't stay with that for very long. I was a product of the 60s, so I was very influenced by the idea of nonviolence. But at the same time, I didn't like getting beat up. And I talked to a friend of mine who was an old hippie, and he said that he was doing this cool thing called Aikido, and that it was all about peace and harmony and being nice to people, but it involved a lot of throws and a lot of very beautiful movement. And so I decided that sounded good, and I went and tried a class. I was very lucky that it was one of the only Aikido schools on the East Coast, happened to be right down the street in my neighborhood. And I went and observed a class and decided I'm going to do that for the rest of my life.
A friend of mine told me that that he knew Aikido would be really good for me because I work in bars and I walk to my car by myself at night, and it was really good for self-defense, and I didn't have to, worry about being armed or anything. So I went to some classes and I loved it.
All right, next question is, why were you attracted to Aikido instead of another style of martial arts?
There is really no other martial arts that is quite like Aikido, because Aikido does not have any competition. It has no kicks, it has no blocks, it has no punches. It is quote-unquote purely defensive. All the other martial arts that I had checked out prior to Aikido were competitive and was all about being in your face and being aggressive, and that's not who I am. So it took me a long time to discover Aikido, but once I discovered it, it was perfect for who I am as a person, because I am not an aggressive in your face kind of person. So this particular style, which involves you not separating yourself from your attacker, from the person who's coming at you. You think of the person who's coming at you as just an extension of yourself, just as a part of you in a different body, that's all. So you blend with that person, you take their energy and you neutralize them. That whole notion was very, very attractive to me, and that's what has kept me in Aikido all these years.
Wow, that's an intense question. I like the fact that it's purely defensive. I like that it's been teaching me how to deal with conflict on a steady basis without having to, risk all of the other, any dangers that could happen. But I think cultivating our reaction to stress is very important. Learning how to react under pressure and to not panic has been very important. It's been very helpful in my own life, on the mat and everywhere else.
I think mostly because of the non-competitive nature of the training. I tend to be not all that great physically. I'm not real fast or well coordinated, but I am fairly competitive, which isn't a good combination the first few years of almost any martial art. I got into Aikido and all you had to do was practice. You didn't have to beat anybody. I could practice.
Well, it's kind of what I was just saying. I didn't like the idea of being. I didn't like bullies, but I didn't want to lower myself to the same level as the bully. So I was not interested in learning to stand there and punch and kick somebody. I knew enough self-defense. I'd learned a little bit of jiu-jitsu, a little bit of judo. I learned enough to defend myself. So that really wasn't as much what I was interested in. I was not interested in competition at all. I had no desire to win trophies or compete in tournaments or any of that stuff. I was never involved in sports. I was very skinny and lightweight for my age, and so that was another factor. I couldn't see going toe to toe with somebody that was twice as big as me and trying to beat them into submission. So the idea that Aikido was purely defensive really appealed to me. That the idea was the other guy's aggression, his own anger and hostility that caused his downfall fit in beautifully with my outlook and my philosophy. So that was it was a perfect match for me.
How has practicing Aikido affected your life?
Well, probably a big part of it is that it's eaten up most of my free time. I set out to practice Aikido just as a student and ended up becoming an instructor because somebody left the dojo. The instructor had started the dojo in Minnesota, where I was training at the time, moved to Japan, and it was teach or stop practicing. There wasn't anyone else to take over. And I discovered once you become the chief instructor of your own dojo, it's a real time sink. On the other hand, I think I'm probably significantly more flexible than a lot of 65-year-olds. And I'm 66 now, so that's got to be pretty good.
I actually practice a lot of Aikido off the mat. At times, it seems more than on the mat. Again, it's about keeping a peaceful mindset, conflict avoidance. If conflict occurs, usually verbally off the mat, I participate in a resolution.
Oh boy. There are so many ways in which I can answer that question. It is, so I'm not a religious person, but for me, the experience of Aikido is the closest thing to religion in other people's lives. It's a way of being, it's a way I carry myself in my daily life. In Aikido, when we are attacking each other, we have to establish proper distance, we have to know the timing with which an attack is coming and how far you are relative to the arm of a person. All of those things are notions that come in handy, for example, when I'm driving and I have to keep the right distance between me and the car in front of me. We're both moving at different speeds. Some of these notions from Aikido translate into everyday life. But the most important thing that Aikido probably gave me is literally my own life, because I happen to come from a family with very, very high blood cholesterol, and my grandfather, whom I take after, died at the age of 47 of a heart attack. And my cholesterol has been extremely high, and I knew as I was approaching 47 that the same thing could happen to me. But because I'd been doing Aikido for about 16 years at that point, I had a blockage in my heart which was 100%, which would have killed almost everyone. But instead, in my case, as the blockage was forming, I also had collaterals these new blood vessels that fed the muscle, which was being deprived of the blood. And so when I actually got myself tested, the doctor was pretty amazed that I was in as good a shape as I was. There was no muscle damage because of this alternate blood supply. So instead of having a heart attack, I was able to carry on my everyday life as if nothing had happened. And eventually I had heart surgery to a bypass to go around the blockage. But I think just from the practice for 16 years, literally has saved my life.
Well, I've made it a family affair. We all do it. My kids do it. I think it's very important. I think it makes me calmer. I think it makes me handle stress better. And I think that it keeps me physically in shape. And it's exciting to be part of it. It feels like I'm part of something that's really special.
Oh, in more ways than I can even express. It has enhanced every aspect of my life. I have met wonderful people who have become lifelong friends. It has affected my entire outlook on my life. I feel that I am a very centered person and a very connected person, a person who feels very much at home in the world and in my skin. My feeling is that if you can remain calm and centered when people are trying to hit you or cut you in half with a samurai sword, then being calm and relaxed in your daily life is taken for granted. It's enhanced every aspect of my life. I think I have a sharper mind, my focus is better, I have self-discipline that I never would have had without the Aikido. I'm in better physical condition than I would have been, that I was before I started, and certainly with better condition than I would have been at my age. All of those things, spiritually, I feel like it's helped me evolve on every level.
Where did Aikido come from?
Okay, well, it comes from O-sensei, Morihei Ueshiba, the founder, who was trained in many different martial arts. The one that he was most influenced by was called Daito-Ru Jujutsu or something like that. It's the Daito-Ru path. And he was a student of the person Takeda, who was the premier proponent of this art. And he studied with him for many, many years. But Daito-Ru it has some Aikido-like moves, but it's extremely brutal. The whole goal of Daito-Ru is to hurt the other person, break their arm, break their joints. It's extremely brutal. What happened was O-sensei at one point, when he started his own dojo and he was teaching some of his own martial stuff that he had incorporated into Daito-Ru, so it wasn't really Daito-Ru anymore. He was sitting and meditating one day, and he just felt, he was in his late 40s, early 50s maybe, when he just felt bathed in light and just felt that he had all of a sudden received some sort of enlightenment. And he realized that Aikido was about love, because it is not about the other person being the attacker, the bad guy. It's all about the other person just being a part of me, just in a different body. And so this realization made him change the techniques, to some extent soften them so we can practice them on the mat without hurting each other. But they all have their roots in the traditional martial arts, a lot of the weapons-based martial arts. Most of our techniques actually come from the Bokken and things like that, and we have modified them now to do them when the other person is not armed or where you are not armed. And so as we teach, we always like to show this is where the technique comes from. It's mortatori, to armed grab, comes from when someone is trying to cut you with a katana.
Where does Aikido come from? Well, geographically, Japan, of course. Historically, the founder had studied a number of different arts, styles of jujitsu, fencing, spear fighting, and he was looking for something and wasn't, I think, entirely sure what he was looking for in that training, and underwent what he described as an enlightenment experience, where he was having an argument with one of his peers. They went out in the garden to settle it with wooden swords. And the other fellow, who was a naval officer, kept trying to hit him and couldn't. And O-sensei never hit him, never counterattacked, just kept getting out of the way, and the guy just could not hit him until he finally got disgusted and threw his sword down and left. And O-sensei described that as, at that moment, he realized that what he had been looking for in the martial arts was not superior fighting prowess, but a way of avoiding the need to fight.
Aikido came from Japan.
Aikido is a Japanese art. It was developed in the early part of the 20th century by a man named Morihei Ueshiba, O-sensei. O-sensei, the actual techniques of Aikido have been traced back much earlier than that. The techniques come from various forms of jujitsu, which is a sort of generic term for a lot of different arts in Japan. But the techniques were traced back to at least the 15th century and probably earlier than that. So these things were being developed during the samurai age in Japan. But O-sensei, around the turn of the century, or the early part of the 1900s, was a consummate martial artist. He had practiced various forms of swordsmanship and empty-handed combat and spear arts, and was basically undefeated. He was challenged hundreds and hundreds of times, and nobody could ever defeat him. But at some point, he lost interest in just learning how to hurt people, and decided that he was a very spiritual man, and he decided that there needed to be another dimension to his practice. And so from those ancient techniques, he developed modern Aikido. It evolved as he evolved from the 1930s, 1920s, and 30s. And then after World War II, of course, it evolved even more into the art of, that we know of as Aikido today. It has evolved somewhat since then. O-sensei died in 1967, but maybe 1969. But we are very fortunate that we're practicing under his direct students. So the students that he had after World War II were young men who, Japan of course was wrecked in those days, and they came to live with him in the dojo and rebuilt the dojo. And they were devoted to the idea of Aikido as an art of peace. And it was a secret art until very late in the 1960s. It wasn't open to the public. You couldn't just walk in and say, I want to practice Aikido. And so he was, our teachers, we're very lucky that we've had the teachers that I've had, because they were a direct connection with the founder of modern Aikido.
I think a little bit it comes from the hearts of a lot of really great people. You know, they pass on a lot of, there's been a lot of really special information that's been passed down. I think that, you know, it's one thing to learn how to protect yourself, but it's a whole other thing to learn how to present yourself. And I think that you really only get to see that from really highly trained teachers. They have a whole different way of handling their energy and their demeanor, and I've learned a lot just from kind of being around that energy, you know. And I think they're getting some of it, whether they know it or not.
What's the philosophy of Aikido?
A way of avoiding the need to fight. Aikido is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think the name says as much as anything about the philosophy. The name Aikido means the way of harmony with ki, which is, in Japanese metaphysics, ki is an energy that infuses everything. All life is a manifestation of ki. The concept behind Aikido is, if you are in harmony with this universal energy, then you are better prepared to defend yourself, you're better prepared to interact with whatever's going on around you.
Well, it's the art of harmony, you know, it's the art of, you know, people are compassionately training with each other both effectively and authentically, but, you know, they're kind of simulating, you know, realistic situations that people could get into, and then you get to practice self-defense, and to have somebody that's willing to simulate like a real attack for you, but you can trust that they're not going to hurt you, you know, and it's a safe environment to be able to practice like that. So I think like compassion would be a major philosophy. Compassionate training and cooperatively working with other people. I think it works on a lot of different levels.
The philosophy of Aikido, well, there's several principles based on nonviolence, spirituality, and if you enter into conflict with an individual, you don't humiliate the individual. You first try to avoid it, and if you can't avoid it, then you resolve it in a manner that doesn't humiliate whoever you're in a conflict with. So that you leave, you might not share the same opinion, but you leave feeling whole and respecting one another versus harboring resentment.
Well, how long have you got? The philosophy of Aikido, the word Aikido itself means the way, do of merging or blending energy. Ki is energy, it's your spirit, it's your spirit made manifest in the world. And I means harmony or blending, connecting. So it's the art of, or way, the path of connecting energy. So it goes much beyond simply learning self-defense techniques. It's not just a way of throwing somebody on the ground or twisting their wrist. The idea of Aikido is that you are learning to extend your energy beyond your physical self in such a way that you can connect that energy with the energy of the person that you're practicing with. And at the higher levels of the art, it goes beyond what happens on the mat. It becomes part of your daily life. So once you find your own center and connect to that universal energy, then you connect to that in everything in your life. So it becomes a way of life and not just a practice that you do. And that's the short version.